funds, road funds, affordable housing funds. It varies from state to state, locality to locality, what they are. But they're widely used in many states and localities. We are going to talk about the constitutional limitations on impact fees later when we talk about takings. So that's the takings clause, and so impact fees count as exactions, and so there's an exaction takings set of tests that we're going to look at. But impact fees are also defined, authorized, and limited, by state law as a growth control mechanism. And so part of what we want to see is that in some states, there are very strict requirements that impact fees be earmarked for infrastructure that directly serves the development. Okay? So if, for example, the developer is required to pay a certain number of dollars into the school fund, those dollars need to be somehow put into an account in those states that require earmarking for schools for that development and not other developments. Right? Does everybody see what I'm saying? Okay, now that is not the requirement in every state, but it is, so some states are much more loose or liberal about impact fees and allow the locality to collect them and just put them in a fund. Usually they have to be for that particular purpose. So you can't use impact fees just for general local government revenues, right? So you can't take the school impact fees, and then build, I don't know, a new city hall or the pay for people to be guests of the mayor at the Derby, for example. Okay, okay. Some of you are following this. Some of you are looking at me blankly. But anyway, that idea, right? I mean, so in other words, they're not general funds, but for the type of infrastructure that's needed. But the infrastructure can, in some states, can serve, a broader. So let's assume for a moment you have, a bunch of development happening in residential subdivision A, residential subdivision B, residential subdivision C. In the states that do not require earmarking, you can put the school impact fee funds all together and build schools that serve that whole area of town. Whereas in the states that require earmarking, you have to show that those particular dollars that the developer for subdivision A has contributed are going for schools that serve subdivision A. Does everybody see that? Okay.
All right. What's the case here?
Kentucky is actually kind of more in between. Okay, so it actually turns out to be sort of a spectrum, really. And so the courts have reined in impact fees that are too indirect, right? But it's not as tight as the St. Johns County case, okay? So again, it's sort of a range of standards across the spectrum. Okay? And finally, urban growth boundaries, okay? And so talking about Kentucky, what you will learn in this class, which I guarantee you is probably not covered in most other land use classes, but that's because they're not getting as superior a land use education as you are here, we say with enormous state pride, is that the very first urban growth boundary was not Portland, like everybody wants to say, wrongly, inaccurately. It was actually Lexington, okay? And Lexington has an urban service boundary that was adopted in 1958. And the urban service boundary prohibits the extension of urban services like roads and sewers and other kind of infrastructure outside of the urban service boundary. So basically prohibits development supporting infrastructure and limits it to the areas within the urban service boundary. And the boundary was drawn on the basis of the quality of soils of the land in what are essentially bluegrass horse farms. Okay, so we're talking about horse breeding farms where the soil is rich in phosphorus and something else that I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
Like calcium in the limestone?
Might be. I think it actually might be magnesium. But it's I think it might be phosphorus and magnesium. But anyway, but phosphorus is the big one. But anyway, the main one. But it is, you know, then of course uptakes into the grasses that the horses eat, and they grow into big, strong, thoroughbred horses that win the Kentucky Derby. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Okay, so the problem is if we ever develop those lands, okay, they're the only ones in the U.S. like that. That goes away. It's like Lake Tahoe, right? I mean, once we destroy Lake Tahoe, there is no more, I mean, it's just a cloudy, murky lake, right? And once we destroy or build over these horse farms in the Lexington area, then, you know, there's not anything more like that. Okay? Now, there are other places. Actually, there's a lot of horse training around Ocala, Florida. Okay? Right? Because actually the weather's pretty good for that to happen down there. But in general, far superior for them to be born, bred, raised here, and then trained down there. Okay? That's the sort of general idea. But, of course, there's all sorts of land development pressures. And so the urban service boundary has undergone some modest adjustments a couple of times since 1958. There have been times when proposed adjustments have been rejected by the local government or the voters. Okay? But again, on the basis of this is going to be the impact on the horse industry if this happens, if we allow development. But let's be honest, there's enormous growth pressures. And as I pointed out early on when we were talking about Lexington as an example of mixed good and bad planning, it is this urban service boundary actually does something really significant from a land use and environmental perspective. But let's be honest, the transportation planning in Lexington is horrible. Okay, right? People drive around Lexington, takes forever, right? It's really awful, right? Okay, so, and I don't know how much of that is inherent in this fact that, you know, we're keeping the development contained, but I do think that probably what happened is that the idea was to keep the development to the urban service boundary, but then nobody really thought through, okay, if we have a lot more development within the urban service boundary, how's everybody going to get around? Okay, because it's all based on kind of how people got around in 1958, which is really was not very forward thinking about how they get around now. Of course, the most famous urban service boundary is Portland's urban growth boundary, which was adopted pursuant to a state statute, the Oregon Growth Management Act, which was enacted in 1973. Okay? So again, obviously, the early to mid-70s is a time period in which lots and lots of local governments are dealing with growth issues. A couple things about this. And you have a case that deals with a variance from their urban growth Portland's urban growth boundary. There are a couple of things. First of all, there is, under the state law, there is an entity called LUBA, and LUBA is the Land Use Board of Appeals. And it was a mechanism set up to basically provide variances from the growth boundaries and growth controls, okay? So that's from the Growth Management Act, okay? So LUBA is a basically kind of like a Board of Zoning Appeals, but it's for the Growth Management Act in Oregon. The other thing that's important to understand is even though Portland gets a lot of attention for having an urban growth boundary, the reality is that it was drawn really far out. And there is a lot of sprawl-like development within Portland's urban growth boundary, okay? And in fact, the density of development in Los Angeles, which often gets blamed for sprawl, right? People say, Los Angeles all spread out and so on and so forth. The density of development in Los Angeles is many times higher than the density in Portland. Okay? I mean, part of the problem with Los Angeles is just so many people, right? But the reality is when you actually get down to it, Los Angeles is a much more densely developed city, even though on first instinct people say, oh no, well, LA's big, sprawling, you have everybody on the freeway all the time and so forth. The thing about Portland is it's just simply a lot smaller community, and they drew a big old urban growth boundary way far out, and then that allows for just traditional kind of sprawling urban development. And Portland has some cool things like downtown and so forth. I mean, there's some stuff like that, but it is not really necessarily driven by the urban growth boundary. Okay, so just to be, so I mean, I've told you at different points along the way, sometimes what we're going to do in this class is look at actual facts and evidence and push on some assumptions that you make. I mean, I'm not at all critical of Portland or of urban growth boundaries or whatever, but I'm just simply saying what people think it does is not what it actually does. Okay, so you just have to kind of ask those tough questions and so forth. And that leads to the fact that as you deal with big box retail establishments, so that's another sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a type of development that can be subject to various kinds of growth controls, right? So local governments sort of think, hey, we want to figure out a way to limit these big box retail stores, right? And they will say, hey, they kill off all our local businesses, our local retail stores and so on and so forth and whatnot. They're big, they're ugly, they're very car-oriented, right? Everybody, right? I mean, when is the last time that you have taken your bicycle to Home Depot to pick up some lumber, right? Right? No, nobody doing that? Go do your shopping at Walmart on the light rail system? No, not doing, no, right, but you see what I'm saying? I mean, think about it, right? I mean, they're very car-centric, big, massive structures with big parking lots and so on and so forth. So sometimes local governments are aiming to rein them in, but the question is, what's the legitimate basis for doing that, right? It's a legitimate basis for doing that. So where local governments have aimed their regulations at particular types of retailers, with certain sales, for example, or certain amounts of inventory or whatever. What's the problem? Where do they get into trouble? It is the lack of a land use nexus, right? Okay, land use nexus is usually a good answer in this class. Okay, land use nexus, right? Does everybody see? Right? Okay, because again, it's aiming to regulate which retailers, not the land use impacts. So if they want to regulate the size of buildings, legitimate. They want to regulate the size of parking lots, legitimate. They want to regulate, for example, how much, of the big trucks with the delivering the inventory, and how many trips per day, or how many trucks, or whatever. Okay, that's got a land use impact. That's legitimate. But if you're trying to design a regulation that says we don't want Walmart because we want Granny Smith's clothing store to survive and thrive, okay, that's basically anti-competitive, right? Does everybody see that? That you're regulating the retail market as opposed to regulating the land use impacts. Does everybody see the issue there? Okay, so that's something that you want to think about. So undoubtedly, community members in your hearing, you're going to have some people who love the idea that there might be a Weston Walmart, and some people who hate the idea that it would be Walmart, right? Okay, but if you are going to convince decision makers to deny the waivers that Walmart is seeking, it has to be on something other than Walmart is bad for our community. Does everybody see that? Why? Why?
Land use nexus.
Yes, there's no land use nexus. Okay, right? Okay, so that is an issue to think about. Okay, so that's it for growth controls. We will now break into teams, take a break, and so forth, and I'm going to come around and talk to each team. Okay? And then we've got almost an hour. Communicate with them. And it should not be somebody on the planning commission, because again, that ex parte thing, it should be a staff person. Planner, the attorney, whoever, somebody. Okay? But yeah. Yes, sir. You have a question?
You answered it. I was going to say, should our legal counsel reach out to theirs?
So you can. It's either way. I think usually in the real world, it's more often the planner who's assigned to sort of the case manager for the project, because what they're really interested in is all the planning details, right? All the design and the traffic and all that kind of stuff. But the lawyer can. I mean, it's either way. But generally, the commissioner shouldn't be engaged in a back and forth with the applicant. The information can be provided ahead of time by the applicant.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So when they're making their argument, the applicant, if we have a question for them, can we interject, or is that just at a certain time?
You can choose to do it however you want. You can ask the questions at the time as they go along, or you can let them make their presentation and then ask questions. Either way.
I think we already put that one on the agenda though. For the community, we can do it at any time, during or after, in between, or at the end. But for Walmart, we're going to have a specific time set for you guys to ask questions.
So what are y'all doing in advance?
We're drafting rules and agenda, and we're going to send that out to them tonight and ask for input from both teams to see if we need to update anything.
Okay.
And the planning staff, which is Mark and I, are going to submit our brainstorm our recommendations that we'll make to the commission.
Well, we need to look through the code and see
Yeah.
what goes against the code, what goes against the plan.
Okay. So
Can I ask you a real quick question before you, like, beyond what, in the files that you sent us, there's like the drawings. Is there anything else that Walmart submitted that we might be missing that we need to be looking at, like as far as their plans are concerned?
Well, I mean, again, if they make revisions or they add additional stuff, I mean, so you got to deal with, the team that that's going to be presenting to you. So they may have other things. So that's why you're going to have to reach out and find out. But everything should be in all of those files between all of that. Everything is submitted, as far as I know. I don't know of any other sources, but but you saw both there was a separate file of drawings, but then there was also the application itself, right? So there's at least a couple different files.
So for that specific question time, is that in the agenda or the hearings? Because I don't.
It's definitely in the agenda. I can't remember if it's in the rules.
Okay, so you want to ask them to have the smart board set up in
Because
there.
all I see is
But
30 minutes
I mean,
a lot.
if I were you, I would say he's sick and you need to come in and get
I don't know if
trained on
Kirsten
it.
did
There
it.
are gonna be other people who want to do PowerPoints and stuff.
There is something in the rules about
Somebody
that we shouldn't interrupt them, but it doesn't particularly say.
Honestly, it's a little bit easier for a law student
Yeah.
to do that because it's going to be Lee or Linda Porter or Jim Becker that you just have to find a time to go in there and so forth.
All right, yeah,
But
it looks like
they
Kirsten
took
took
all
it
that
out,
stuff
but I
out,
think
so
we're
we
gonna
have to
need
put
that
it
sign to
back
put it back
in.
in.
But
It'll
Lee
be,
has the syllabus, so he knows this is
It'll be
coming
right
up, which is-
between
Mhm.
presentation requests and
Yeah.
public forum. How much time do you guys want for that? That's a good question. I think we had 30 initially, but if you guys probably aren't gonna need quite that much, but I don't know.
30 minutes just for asking questions?
Yeah, probably.
that you,
We were being really broad the first draft.
Yeah, no. I can't, I don't know, I don't speak for everyone, but maybe like 10, 15 minutes. I mean, then if we don't use it all, then we can just, I don't think we'll need 30.
Okay.
I do think it would
all
be a
right,
good
so
idea
let
to
me
get,
ask,
for
okay,
like, just let them go
okay, we'll
through.
go back to.
Yeah, they're 30 then you're.
You said
okay.
brainstorm. What exactly are you going to end up doing? What's the end result of the planning staff's work?
Make recommendations to the commission.
What does that look like?
A staff report?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to make sure. I mean, you're not just making some oral recommendations, right? You actually need a staff report. Right?
Yeah.
And it's got to have analysis, right? And in there, it's also got to have what?
Findings.
Yes, findings, okay? And there's actually more findings than you might think that need to be made. So this is where your legal counsel can help you. Hello, legal counsel that's not paying attention. Oh, you're the legal counsel. I thought he was, okay. So you're the, all right.
But we're the.
Okay, so you want to make sure that you've got everything that has to be, all the findings that have to be made for the waivers. So it's actually the waivers. They're actually so they're seeking different waivers, right? Okay. So how many different waivers are they looking at? What are the waivers?
There's certain I know there's 3, and then there's the alley closure we were just talking about.
Right? So what has to be found for the alley closure is different than, like, for example, the setback from the front. That's a different, right? You see, there's some different standards there, and so you're gonna need a set of waivers for each and every. I mean, a set of findings for each and every waiver.
Okay.
And some of them are gonna repeat the same standards. Okay, so some of them the standards are different, but some of them the standards are the same. But what you're assessing is going to be different. In other words, whether it qualifies or not, you have to make separate findings for each waiver. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, the legal staff and the planning staff really have to work together on this because that's how that report gets put together. You're going to also have to make it available. Right, so you're making recommendations to the planning commission, so the applicant needs it, but the other team the community team needs it too, right? They need to know what is it that you're saying, which then they might agree or they might attack it or whatever, but it's not just for the planning commission members, but of course you have to provide the planning commission members as well. And to me, okay, now that was the other thing. I need to tell the Walmart team that. But anyway. I cannot grade you unless I get each and everything that you use, okay? So if you're providing something to to the planning commission, or you're presenting something, if it's a PowerPoint, if it's a report, if it's a whatever, I need it. Your rules, etc. So you can send it electronically, you can give me a physical copy, I don't care. But
Is that just as long, is there like a certain date that we need to get that by? Obviously
Well, before
before it starts, but,
well, or at the end of before I give you a grade.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I need to be able to see everything that
Okay.
was done. That's not like your
like those are the basic ones.
yeah, your discussion notes among yourselves. I don't care, I mean,
That section
like
governs,
about how you're gonna put the staff, but just whatever you.
But like
produce.
agenda, hearing
Agenda, the
rules, status
the-
report.
Yeah, staff report, that kind of
Staff
stuff,
report.
yeah.
And if there's something we're sending out to the whole class and we use Blackboard, you're part of.
If it's all users, I'm good.
Okay.
Yep. So that's an easy way
Even
to
217
make sure I'm getting it. Just send email, all users, it'll come.
And for planning commission, for the staff report, when can we get that? Or do we get that at the meeting, or?
versus if you look at 217,
I think
that's the
your
layout of
your
boards.
commissioners,
So which one are you looking
the
at?
applicant, and the community are all gonna need the staff
Yeah.
report ahead of time, to be
Before
able to
the-
read it and think about it and so forth, right? I mean, do you see where?
No, but a board of adjustment is
So
who
you have to
issues
think about
That's
where
it's
that's
called
gonna
a board
be.
of
And can we bring that with,
adjusting.
if we're part of the planning commission, can we bring that with us
I'm pretty
to
sure
the meeting?
a board
Of
of
course.
adjustment.
Probably you should.
Yes, from planning.
Yeah. Yes.
What is the difference between the planning commission and the board of adjustment?
Okay, so the planning commission has responsibility for compliance with the plan. Okay, the board of zoning adjustment has certain sorts of so they do conditional use permits, they do variances. This is a waiver, which is sort of like a variance, but because it's a waiver from the plan, it's actually decided by the planning commission. So there's something, okay, I'm gonna forget off the top of my head what it is, but there's something that it ultimately also has to go, so it's shared authority. Is that what you're asking about? There's something in there that then ultimately also went to the board of zoning adjustment, right? Is everybody, am I remembering that right? In this?
I think I was just confused as to, because
I think Walmart needed something from the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And I think it's mentioned somewhere in there, but it was something minor, but that's not what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the waivers that the planning, the main things that were on the agenda for the planning commission to decide. I forgot what it was that they.
Setback issue,
Yeah.
a setback issue in the back.
Right. So in other words, there was something the planning commission did not have the authority to grant or deny. It went to the board of zoning adjustment, but it was a real minor thing. But the issue of not being up at the street and instead being back, that's an issue of a waiver from the plan. That's something y'all would decide. So.
And so, as far as the traffic study, which we don't have access to, we'll just go by the conclusions and recommendations that are in their report.
Yeah. I mean, I think the conclusions and recommendation of the report are pretty good. I mean, they're pretty adequate for giving you a feel for what the.
That's fine. What I'm saying is basically, I'm planning to literally copy this from the original staff report,
Just copy this.
rather than trying to investigate.
Right, no,
Yeah.
well, I mean, how could you, right? I mean, no, you can't, just copy it.
Yeah.
Anything that's a fact that requires a study that you can't do, because this is a simulation, just copy it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. And again, I mean, I guess to be more precise with my question, like, in what form were these requests
Okay, so there's
made?
glass,
In the
windows,
first,
there's building
like, I don't
entrances,
see that.
road
Like, I see the
closures,
staff
and there's
report that
setbacks
lists
/ parking
these
lot.
requests, When did Walmart send those in?
Those are the four right here.
Or is this something that
Setback
the
slash
staff went back
parking
to
lot,
Walmart
road
with and said,
closures,
"Here's
building
your plan
entrance,
back,
and
here's
glass
what you-
windows. Yep.
You know,
Okay.
here's where you're breaking the law.
Well, there was some back and forth, but are you on block?
Yeah.
Okay, so go back to the list.
I must be missing things. Like you said,
Okay, so,
But
it's actually, I got you the other way. Okay. So, where's the rendering? There's applicant justification.
What we need to do, the rules.
Go to that.
And then like setback.
Entrance somewhere else.
So there's their proposed findings.
This is from the regulation itself.
Setback is the bar.
Application for waivers.
Oh,
No.
Okay, all right, so we go back.
Yeah, this is the-
All right, so go back.
Yeah, those are the four.
I'm
So
trying to find a
even like
wall
a sheet
that
of paper that's
underneath
so
it.
give
Oh,
them-
development.
that allows them that demand findings. I can't find
That's just the drawing.
All right.
And see, this is where I was confused, like, are we supposed to
Well,
start
that's
from
the-
scratch and like going through every detail on this?
But you consider the procedure for amending types of regulations and there's a
So that's
Like-
starting. They change it.
Where's the plan?
To not have to follow.
Yeah,
this.
okay, but it's
That would
actually
be
a good
a-
one.
Yeah.
But.
Not a
but
zoning
when you- but see,
restriction, it would
You got
be a,
deliberation, right?
Mhm.
But you actually need to sort of think about how the vote is gonna go.
I
Okay.
think we talked about it.
I mean, actually, I just don't.
so what do you think?
So,
I don't think
so
it's
how's it
ordinance.
gonna work?
You were gonna say it?
We're,
like if you're violating ordinance.
yeah, we're gonna go waiver by waiver, and each one we're
Because
this is
right.
waiver number one,
As the
and we're gonna
executive
ask all the
Done.
commissioners to do their findings of fact one by one and vote as
No,
they.
no.
No?
Okay.
That's too much.
Okay.
I mean, that is, for one, it's very cumbersome, okay? So,
Waiver by
what you
waiver.
want is
Yeah.
a motion
Okay.
that is a motion to approve or deny for the following
What is that
reasons, and
section?
there's your findings, and then
Is
whoever's
that what
making
they're
the
asking
motion
for?
has to
Yeah.
state
They're asking
what
for
they
that one
are.
for sure?
Section number 5.
Of course, people
No,
can,
5, 6,
other
7,
commissioners
6.
can suggest, here's some other findings that need to be, that we wanna make.
Said
or,
requested waiver
can
of section
suggest,
5.
either
5.6.
additions to the findings
Instead
of
of
fact or
summary.
modifications. So,
It doesn't even have to be
people, might articulate other reasons.
Oh,
So
so
basically,
that's an ordinance.
somebody needs to make a
Yeah.
motion.
So the
Yeah,
chair
that makes
should
sense. So
Yeah.
you're not
so the chair should basically do the findings of facts with the motion, or
Ordinance
No, that's not what I'm
isn't
saying,
the
no.
legislative.
That's what I'm saying. So, somebody makes a motion
It's us made, so I mean, we
to
can.
approve
That's
the
not
waiver or
zoning.
deny the waiver
I mean, this is.
Okay.
for the following reasons. And then you can have
Well, as far
makes
as,
a set
as
of
far as I
findings of
understand it,
fact,
because like, I don't think that,
or proposes a set of findings of fact that matches that.
because I always thought zoning had to come out of the legislative body. Like an ordinance, like,
I
hey,
mean,
you
so the
use a
group, if the
particular
group
kind of
doesn't like those
wood or
findings,
something, is like
they
a building.
modify them, or they vote against the motion. Right?
And then they say their reasons.
So the rest of the group doesn't have to do any findings unless they're specifically different.
Develop reviews and maintain
So, in
2020
general,
comprehensive
the thing is,
including
findings are
recommendation
gonna kind of
and
go one way or the other.
implementation
There's
of
either
the
be,
plans.
you have the findings that are necessary to support granting the waiver, the findings that are necessary to deny the waiver, right? I mean, so you're, and it's gonna be, I mean, so, the group can say, like somebody can say, well, before we vote, I think we also ought to find blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Okay. But, so people can add, but you don't have to have each commissioner go around and say, I make the following findings. No, it's
Okay.
just part of the motion, all right? You following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The motion needs a second, right? You can do additional deliberation. Why, and so that, then people sometimes articulate, I agree with you, I don't. But usually by the time you've done deliberations, we've got a pretty good idea of, how people are
So
reading.
deliberations have already
So this would
like
be a
talked
deliberation.
about
Right.
everything,
Right.
and so then it's motion to for these findings.
Right, and so the motion needs to be, what the decision is, to approve the waiver or to deny the waiver. One or the other, right? And then the findings need to fit that, to what kinds of findings, right? But there can be additional, discussion or deliberation And then the chair calls for a vote, and it's yes or no from each commissioner, right? Does that make sense?
So if I was just, Shelby's the planning commissioner and I'm part of the commission, I would say I would like to make a motion to approve
Yep.
such and such waiver for the following findings of fact. List my findings of fact. Someone would second it.
Second. Okay.
He seconds it, and she would call the vote.
Right,
And then
you
we
want to
go.
give it, you want to give a moment for people to weigh, you know, to make any further statements, like, yeah, I agree with that, you know, I think that's a bad idea, I think these
you in the land
additional
development code
findings
right now?
need to be
You gotta.
added
So
to
there's a
it.
little bit of a gap between calling the vote
So
and
that's what I was
calling the
gonna say,
motion.
can I ask, before calling the vote, when he makes that motion and gets seconded, can I ask if there's any further discussion?
Yes, that's the best way to do it, just
If
any
no
further
one
discussion
says
on the
no, then
motion.
we move to vote.
Yeah, exactly, yep,
Okay.
you do.
We should probably write that.
Or,
Yeah.
But
section
that's what I'm
9.
saying, is that's the piece that's
Point
missing
one.
from Pierce's,
There we go.
script, that
11,
actually,
11.5.
you wanna make, because
So I think
this is the part.
No, I
that-
remember asking you about that last
Well,
week.
what is, section 9?
Well, this is the part that under the time
Nine
pressure,
point-
people kind of get
wait,
caught
where
up
is
in the moment, and you forget to
It's
do
a
the
big
right check.
whirlwind.
Huh?
Big
chapter-
whirlwind, like,
Yeah,
all right,
exactly.
I'm
well,
not
Yeah.
sure how this is
Yeah.
written, but so it's like, says.
So,
waiver
yeah,
pursuant to
and,
chapter 11.
so,
And- So I'm not sure which one.
and so probably what you want is
This one's
each
findings
commissioner
necessary
to
for
vote yes or
granting
no,
waiver
one by one, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So, I would just have a list. Who's taking your minutes?
Does that help?
Okay, so
Whatever.
you also.
Yeah, okay.
are going
I was
to-
gonna say, that's what I was like, I
Or
think
you
that's
need to
where we're
have
trying
an
to go.
official
So
list
this is
for each waiver,
the,
and then you're gonna have
We will have
what the
information
motion
on
is,
bylaws.
and then yes or no.
Yeah.
And so the yes or no is with respect to the motion, so the motion might be
That's
to
like the
approve,
first.
the motion might be to deny, right? So you have to write that down,
And then we'll need
but
additional
you want it pre-printed with who the commissioners are.
I guess we
You
use
said
this
that
one too, in
makes sense?
case we.
So that you could just record yes or no, and so then,
The whole thing?
I guess, Shelby
Oh,
will
I was
announce
like-
what the vote is,
Oh, yeah,
you
just
know.
chapter.
And, you know, we've had, I mean, it's been unanimous, it's been, 4-3, it's been 5-2 on this one, and, 6-1 on another one, and, I mean, it's been, over the years, it's been all sorts of things.
Does it just have to be majority?
Majority.
Let's go unanimous, guys. Sounds easier.
Chair's voting no. So you've got 7 of you, right?
One, well, we don't know if it's Pierce gonna be there.
Make,
We should have 7.
make changes if you want.
If not, then I would be the,
So,
Why not
so,
vote?
so you're.
Yeah, I mean,
Are you the vice chair?
No, I'm the chair.
Well, you're the chair now.
Yeah, Mr. Pierce, I was the vice chair before.
Okay, so you stepped in, yeah, I suggest that, okay, so you're now the chair, so you have 5 others plus Pierce, right? You, 5 others and Pierce, right?
Mhm.
Is there anybody who doesn't,
Okay, so everybody needs
I mean, so if Pierce can't do it, you can decide somebody else is the 7th commissioner, right?
Oh, just it.
So, but, I mean,
Okay.
now, it shouldn't be you
Oh, so
or
the least
Joe.
emails are everybody.
Huh?
So there's the lead people and the lead
Yes,
council.
one of
gonna do
the,
the findings
but
necessary for
if Joe's the main,
Because Arthur has a thing.
You go to chapter 9. You said that
But,
are you the main lawyer?
Yeah.
Okay, so then, yeah, so it's just, you can't be on the commission. But
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is Pierce can't
There was
come,
chapter 11 and
One or the
section 8,
other
and there
of
was
y'all can be,
9.1.
but not you, because you're doing the
Chapter
second
9.
one, right?
Oh, parking?
Okay.
All right, all right.
So, yeah, we needed that. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
fine,